More than 13 crore displaced, thousands killed, residential buildings reduced to rubble, cities, they've come to a virtual standstill. The Russia-Ukraine war in its 100th day has Ukraine reeling under Russia's relentless assault for 100 days and counting. And sadly, there seems to be no end to this war anytime soon. The eastern part of the war-torn Ukraine remains besieged, with Russian forces carrying out multiple missile, rocket and artillery attacks. India Today brings you the latest on day 100 of this conflict.
The fire in Eastern Europe has been burning out for the last 100 days. The war that started on February 24th is nowhere near its end.
I've taken the decision to conduct a special military operation. Its purpose is to protect people who have been subject to abuse and genocide by the Kiev regime for 8 years. And to do this, we will strive to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine.
The special ops Russian President Vladimir Putin expected to end in a few days could go on for many more days, if not months. Ukraine has resisted, and how? The European continent has found a new hero in President Volodymyr Zelensky, who refused to flee his country when faced with Russian invasion.
Всім добрий вечір. Лідер фракції тут, голова Офісу президента тут, прем'єр-міністр Шмигаль тут, Подоляк тут, президент тут. Всі ми тут, наші військові тут, громадяни суспільства тут, всі ми тут. Захищаємо нашу незалежність, нашу державу. І так буде і далі. Слава нашим захисникам, слава нашим захисницям. Слава Україні!
Russia advanced quickly through eastern Ukraine, but faced the Ukrainian might as its forces neared Kyiv. While it rained death and destruction, stiff fight back forced the Russian forces to make a strategic retreat from the gates of the capital city. The Russian pullback from Kyiv revealed the real horrors of the war. The killings of civilians in Bucha, a suburb of Kyiv, shocked humanity. India Today's reporters who were in Bucha revealed the real picture to the entire world.
And armored personal carriers show and indicate the kind of battles that have taken place in this area. Not one, not two, but multiple burnt tanks and APCs in this area.
Many nations have since then launched investigations into alleged war crimes in Bucha. Having pulled back from Kyiv, Russia shifted focus to Donbas region in its second phase of war. Today, Russia controls key Ukrainian cities in eastern Ukraine, including Mariupol and Kherson. Heavy fighting has ensued in Mykolaiv and Kharkiv. While Russia has made significant war gains, they have come at a huge economic cost. The country is reeling under sanctions imposed by the West.
I spent a lot of time in Ukraine when I was a senator and vice president. I've spoken to the Rada in the days when they, in fact, didn't have what you'd call democracy, and was there in the Maidan when the former leader had to take off and head into Russia. And so, you know, but the Ukrainian people have a lot of backbone. They have a lot of guts, and I'm sure you're observing it.
Russia so far has put up a brave front. Kremlin has time and again warned the world of severe consequences, even dangling the nuclear threat at times. The effect of the war is being felt across the globe. Inflation is surging, posing the single biggest challenge to the whole world. For a world that's emerging out of a pandemic, the Ukraine war has come as a double blow. Bureau Report, India Today.
So day 100 of the Russia-Ukraine war, and President Zelensky has conceded Ukraine has lost about 1/5 of its territory to Russia. The battle intense in Severodonetsk. Russia, of course, has claimed it will pursue its special operations till all its objectives are met. The question is there an end in sight? Is there any scope now for a peacefully negotiated settlement? Or are we looking at a prolonged war of attrition in Europe? Some of the finest minds from across the world join me on this India Today special broadcast. I want to welcome on this show Sviatoslav Yurash, a young Ukrainian member of parliament who joins me from Kiev. He is en route Donbass. Dr. Tinatin Akhridiani is a research fellow at the Foreign Policy Center for European Policy. She joins us from Brussels. Gil Bandola is a senior fellow, Defense Priorities, a senior research fellow at the Center for the Study of Statesmanship, joins me from Washington, D.C. Ambassador Ajay Malhotra, former Indian ambassador to Russia. Always a privilege having you on the broadcast, sir. And Zenia Kondrateva is a senior journalist, joins us from Moscow, Russia. Mr. Yurash, I want to come to you first, sir. 100 days into this conflict, President Zelensky says 20% of the country is lost. Are you looking at a negotiated settlement, or will this war continue for long? Is there a timeline in your appreciation?
It's by no means lost. It's occupied. That's what he said. And obviously it will be freed and liberated, as the area around Kiev was, as the area around Chernihiv and Sumy and Kharkiv was. We won those battles. We shall win the battle of Donbass and battle for Kherson, battle for Crimea.
Okay. I'll take a moment and try and reestablish that link. The young member of parliament is on his way to the Donbass region. Zenia Kondrateva, is this a major loss of prestige for Russia in general and for President Putin in particular? Ukraine, that was expected to collapse in weeks, if not days, continues to fight on the 100th day and is talking about retaking territory lost to Russia in the east.
Well, I wouldn't call any war a loss of prestige, because those two things don't really go together. But secondly, I believe this is quite a Western dominated narrative that Russia was expecting, Kyiv to fall in 2-3 days. There is a lot of argument, there is a lot of discussion about that, whether that was really a plan or it wasn't. And many believe it wasn't. So I think Russia quite realized the kind of the state of Ukraine, and it assessed well the kind of resistance it will face. Maybe not very well, especially in some areas, but I think Russia is prepared to go ahead, and I don't really see anyone expecting this to end soon,
okay.
Unfortunately.
You don't expect this to end soon. Mr. Yurash, you're back with us, hopefully. How long, in your appreciation, will this conflict continue?
As soon as Mr. Putin decides to leave our country alone, as soon as Russians leave our country at peace. It's very simple. The reality is that we have a Ukrainian nation, a Ukrainian state, and Russia wants to destroy it. Putin himself has said as much. You can all watch the video on YouTube, which is English subtitles, or now alone, where Putin expresses just sentiment. Ukraine doesn't exist. It should be a part of Russia. Mr. Putin's goal is very clear.
Okay. Okay. Let me bring in Dr. Akhridiani for a moment. Does Europe stand united with Ukraine, or a prolonged war, in your appreciation, Doctor, may see this support waning?
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. Indeed. So what we basically are witnessing now, this is the European Union's unity of the largest scale so far we could do. And as you know, and as to explain for the audience, EU has already had internal disagreements over the member states on its common foreign and security policy. However, this conflict and Russia's full military invasion of Ukraine made the European Union as united as actually never before. And we can witness this not only in terms of the support that EU managed to provide for Ukraine, but also in terms of the sanctions and the scale of the sanctions that EU was in the end able to put forward against Russia. So far we are witnessing the largest scale sanctions imposed on Russia in the whole history, from the EU as well as from the West.
But are they working? And let me take that to Gil Bandola. Russia says US giving longer range weapons to Ukraine will only prolong this war, and the hardship not just for Ukraine or Russia or Europe, but practically the entire world. In your appreciation, will the US continue to fund and arm Ukraine with longer range weapons, and will this actually lead to a fight virtually being endless to degrade Russia's ability to pose a threat to Europe?
Yeah, I think ultimately it's a war of attrition. I think we've seen that very clearly now after that initial Russian gambit to take Kiev, it looks like failed. So I think, yeah, the United States is fully committed. You know, we've approved $40 billion, kind of an unprecedented sum, or at least you need to go back to the Second World War to see something similar. So yeah, the United States is going to keep arming Ukraine, but has fenced off sort of the type of weapons provided. You know, President Biden was very clear in the New York Times a couple of days ago, saying that we are not arming the Ukrainians to attack Russian territory. We're arming them to defend themselves and retake their territory. So the HIMARS, the rocket systems being sent over now are the next piece of that.
Okay. Ambassador Malhotra, the Western Bloc seems to be losing patience with India. They want India to adopt a harder stance on Russia. Their point is India stands to gain more by aligning with the US and, of course, NATO. Russia is a waning power. Do you agree with this assessment?
Well, that's their assessment and they're entitled to it. And we have to look at it from our viewpoint and where our national interest lies. India's response to the Ukrainian crisis has all along been very carefully modulated. Our approach to the conflict has been independent, it has been balanced, it has not been frozen in time, and it has evolved as the situation has developed. Initially, we spoke of a peaceful resolution of disputes in our EOV's explanation of votes at the UN. But once Russian troops moved in, we reiterated them.
Okay. Okay. And Xenia Kondrateva, the viewpoint from Moscow. How long will Russia be able to withstand the sanctions? European leaders reached an agreement late Monday to ban 90% Russian crude by the end of the year. What does this mean for Russians?
As some of the highest authorities said, you know, there are always customers for oil. Of course, we can't dismiss the fact that the supply chains are disrupted, the logistics, the global supply chain are disrupted, and it will take some time for both Russia and its customers in Asia to figure it out. But you know, I've been reporting on the energy industry for years now, and I would say that the shift towards, you know, green energy is a greatest thing for this planet, but then it also will take time. So you can impose sanction and you can, you know, try to say that 90% of Russia's oil supply is now banned, but it will anyway somehow get to the same European customers through other routes, because the planet to you know, to grow, to develop, countries need oil and gas. Yes. And there is no way around it for now.
So, in that be true, Dr. Akhlidiani, are sanctions actually working on Russia? Look at the way the Russian economy seems to be bouncing back after initial sanctions.
Well, the sanctions are indeed working, and we should here know that we do not actually know what is going on the ground. All what we know from the screens, and this is badly manipulated, and not badly manipulated necessarily, but it's very much affected by the Central Bank of Russia. As we could see from the beginning of the war, the interest rates were really increased, and then the Russian ruble was really crippling. The recovery now is basically could only be assigned because of all the tools Russia was using, basically to forcing its companies to do their foreign reserves and then to push its customers to pay for the energy supplies back in Russian rubles. Now, to add on the comments of the previous speaker, basically, we need to know, to clarify that the current sixth package of the sanctions of the European Union do not forbid all oil imports from Russia, right? So the pipelines, the oil that runs through the pipeline is so far exempted. Does this mean that the current ban on oil imports from Russia could still be more significant than this is right now? However, still, this will refer 70% of imports of oil from Russia. So this will still have an effect. As for finding another oil customer, so this can be problematic for Russia because oil delivery of the oil still requires some infrastructure, and then Russia will also need to find the customers who will be able and willing to import Russian oil in the preferred, prices and preferred conditions that Russia wants to supply them. Right now, China is, for instance, recovering from the pandemic effects. However, we do not really see anywhere in the world increased demand for energy supplies from Russia. So this may not also happen overnight.
Okay. Ambassador Malhotra, your view, are sanctions working on Russia, or are sanctions hurting Europe as much, Africa when it comes to, wheat and food grain? Are these sanctions hurting the world in general? They're intended to target Russia. What's the way forward in your view?
Indeed, they are hurting the world. And so far, I think the Russian economy has handily shown its resilience. I think, as previous speakers mentioned, after an initial decline to 130 rubles against a dollar, it's now at 64. And far from collapsing, the ruble is right now the best performing currency against the dollar this year. The reference was there to interest rates being brought down from 20 to 11%. And the crude oil price of Brent being 117 per barrel means that Russia is getting a huge bonus. Russia, anything above 60 is a major add-on for it, 60 per barrel. And even if you see Western assessments today, whereas earlier they were saying that the Russian economy will decline by 40%, now they're saying that they've toned it down to an 8% decline, which is a normal sort of a thing and can happen to anyone. The impact has equally been on Western economies, let's not get that wrong. But the real suffering has been, I think, on many in poorer countries due to food, wheat, sunflower oil and other products. And there are growing fears of a humanitarian catastrophe in these countries, which is simply linked with the fact that some countries want to continue fighting and others are pouring in highly sophisticated weaponry to encourage them to do so.
And the African Union
to find a solution up here.
Absolutely, and the African Union has raised this. The United Nations is now getting involved. Mr. Bandola, are talks and negotiated peace settlement, as suggested by Henry Kissinger, perhaps a possible way forward? Do you see this as a way forward?
I do. I hope that's what ultimately happens, but I don't think it's imminent. As you've said, as we've discussed, the war is raging, at a high intensity in the east. The U.S. is keeping Ukraine afloat. The U.S. and Europeans, to a lesser degree, militarily. The Russians have certainly, as the previous speaker said, as the ambassador said, the Russian economy is proved surprisingly resilient and has kind of rebuffed, some of those initial fears of collapse. So I think I don't think any kind of negotiated solution or even a ceasefire is imminent. I think both countries have proven they can take a lot of pain militarily and economically.
And economically.
That's going to be ongoing. Yeah, absolutely.
So, Dr. Atilvidyani, then what's the way forward, given the fact that this conflict is actually hurting poorer countries much more? Look at what the African Union is saying. They need the wheat, they need the oil, and they want the United Nations to intervene. And Russia's made it very clear that if you're taking this wheat out, you also take their products out.
Indeed, but I think international community should have the leverage, and it will have the enough leverage on Russia to basically enable the country to stop blocking the Black Sea ports that are now blocked in Ukraine, which doesn't enable all the exports of the wheat and grains to leave the country, and therefore there is this international shortages. And here the unity and coordinated action of all the Western powers, G7 and international community would really be the key to increase the pressure and leverage on Russia, because these grains and wheat, like 90% of them are now sitting there and basically are just lost and wasted. So indeed, Russia should stop weaponizing food and stop like seizing the ports. That could be the only way out from this current situation. This will require increased negotiations and pressure on Russia. And as for the overall effect of the sanctions, obviously we already see the effect of sanctions in the Western countries and also globally. However, we do not have exact precise information how these sanctions are hurting the average citizens in Russia. All we can see is something that Russia is reporting, but we do not have access to the information on the ground.
Let me put that question to Zenia Kondrateva. President Putin is being accused of weaponizing hunger. UK is saying that several countries are saying you cannot stop the supply of wheat to Africa and use this as a tool to get sanctions off you. How are people in Russia taking these sanctions? How is it impacting you?
See, people in Russia are facing obviously different sanctions, and they do not know, or they would not believe that Russia is weaponizing, food or energy for that matter, because there is a war happening in the country, and the ports are blocked not because Russia wants to, restrict the supplies of grain to the other countries. That I hope that is understood clearly by everyone who is speaking on the panel. But if you ask how, because some of the speakers have doubted how sanctions impact Russians, so I must say that immediate impacts are only felt by those Russians that are some 2 or 3 hundred thousand of people who lost their jobs immediately after the Western companies have pulled out. We will see the impact, the massive impact, maybe 6 months or 1 year down the line.
Okay.
But immediately, you cannot say that the entire country is, really struggling economically. People have not yet, I repeat it, yet felt those pressures.
So 100 days into this conflict, people are not feeling the pressure, or not yet feeling the pressure in Russia. Ambassador Malhotra, your appreciation, are talks then the only way forward? And if the United States continues to arm Ukraine, those talks won't happen? Or if Russia doesn't stop its operations, then again those talks don't happen?
I agree with what you're saying. The only way to have a peace which is a durable one is by comprehensively addressing the security concerns of both Russia and Ukraine. And if you see carefully their positions, both countries, Ukraine and Russia, are demanding written, ironclad security guarantees from others. And therein lies the kernel of a possible solution. Unfortunately, neither the Security Council is doing anything about it, and efforts to engineer a solution meeting Russian and Ukrainian interests are not being explored. But there is an opportunity to do so. But if more and more lethal weaponry and clashes are being encouraged, then you'll only have devastation. You'll have more deaths, you'll have more destruction, you'll have more hunger in many parts of the world. And let me add that I don't believe Russia is weaponizing the hunger. This is really due to the fact that one of the ports is mine, which is Odessa, which is the only port actually which Ukraine has at the moment. And if they remove their MARSEC 3 code which they put in, it says that no ships can go in or out, and remove the mines, then it's ready to go. I think that solution on the hunger will be found soon. But for the larger solution, I think further clarity on the ground will have to come before one or the other side moves.
I will let that be the last word on this part of the show. To all my guests, Dr. Akhledani, Gil Bandrola, and Ambassador Ajay Malhotra and Zinia Kondrateva for joining me on this India Today special broadcast. Many thanks. So present, imperfect, future, tense. Will there be a negotiated settlement? It doesn't appear very likely given the hard line adopted both by the United States of America and by Russia. That is all we have for you on this special broadcast. Many thanks for watching.